So one of the most important aspects in making mead is figuring out when the mead is ready to sell. And a lot of our staff, they'll come up to me when they're new hires and say, hey, when's this going to be ready? And they think I'm being sarcastic when I say it's ready when it's ready. We really don't know with certain cases. And one of those cases is barrel aging. So we operate one of the largest barrel aging programs for mead in the world. And what we're going to do is pull a stainless steel nail out of the front of this barrel, and we're going to see how this mead is aging, really. There are all these different factors that have to do with relative humidity and temperature that can affect how liquid moves in or out of the staves of a barrel. And when you're looking at these barrels around me, each of these staves are about an inch thick, and the liquid will actually get about 1/4 of an inch or more into the liquid. And as those different factors of temperature and humidity and time change, we're going to have liquid going in and out of the staves and extracting flavor from the wood. So one example of that is when you cook or toast the wood, the lignin that makes up wood, kind of the, what is wood, the fibrous material, you can chemically change lignin to vanillin, and vanillin is the exact same flavor that you get from a vanilla bean or that you have in vanilla ice cream. So you can get flavors like vanilla and even coconut and nutmeg from oak based on where the trees grew, how fast they grew, how long the staves were aged in a stave yard, and then ultimately how the barrel was treated as far as its toasting level and how they toast it. There are so many factors that can be considered when it comes to barrel aging, and we try and look at all of these different aspects and the exact mead that's going in there to try and pair or create something really unique or complementary as far as the flavor profile we're going to get from the wood. I'm going to pull a nail on Endovellicus, and Endovellicus is one of our most famous products. It is a raspberry mead, so we use Arizona honey and raspberry juice, and it has always been aged in a port barrel. So this is actually a ruby port barrel from Portugal that we import it, and we're going to see how this is tasting. When we look at our liquid chronicle, this piece of paper on the front of the barrel, it's going to tell me what is inside of it, when it went in. So this actually went in May of 2018. So this product is going to be at least 2 years old before we release it, aged in a port barrel. So the first thing I have to do is clean or sanitize this stainless steel nail. And I'm going to remove this nail in a moment, and that's how we're going to get a sample out of this barrel. Sometimes there's a negative pressure that builds up inside the barrel, so I'm also going to sanitize the silicone bung on the very top of the barrel. So when you see a barrel, you can see that it's a little bit wider in the middle, and that's called the bilge, and that's where the bung is always going to go. So now this sample is just about dry, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this nail out. If I happen to drop this nail on the ground, I've got a jar of nails that are resting in isopropyl alcohol, so we don't have to worry about cleanliness or sanitation. Going to get this just right. Now we're taking a sample of some beautiful raspberry mead that's aging in a port barrel. That is something. So the first thing we want to do is evaluate the appearance and the aroma. And it is just this beautiful garnet red color, so that's spot on. And it's just everything honey and raspberry busting out of that nose. Oh, wow. Wow, this is just one of the best things that we've ever made. All right, let's see how some other meads are doing. Man, that is good. So we're gonna pull another sample. This is a similar mead because it's in a port barrel and it has raspberry juice, but we also fermented this with Belgian dark candy sugar, which is a caramelized beet sugar from Belgium, and one of the defining characteristics of a Belgian dark strong ale, one of my favorite styles of beer. So we've got a fresh sample glass here. While this is drying, I'm gonna talk to you guys for a minute about mead. So mead is the world's oldest fermented beverage. And all of our ancestors, no matter where you're from, whether it's Europe, Africa, even Mesoamerica, our ancestors were all enjoying mead, and people would really ferment sugar in anything that they found, right? So whether it was honey or fruits, and eventually, as we were able to cultivate grains like barley and rice, people would make alcohol out of any of those sugars that they had access to. Honey was really one of the easiest sugars to get besides the bees, because nature is making this beautiful source of honey. Bees collect nectar and they bring that back to the hive. There are enzymes in their honey sac that start to convert that nectar into what will become honey, but the bees actually will put that honey into the honeycomb in the hive, and they have to dry out the moisture content to be below about 18%, and that will be stable. So when we talk about stability in alcohol, it means that it won't ferment. So they remove so much moisture from the nectar that honey is something that is stable and will not ferment inside the hive. If they didn't do that, the bees would be making mead themselves. And there are cases in nature where a beehive in the crux of a tree will become swamped from a big rainstorm, and then that'll actually start with some just ambient heat, dissolve some of that honey, and mead can happen spontaneously in nature, which would be really cool to find one day. Well, we can't wait for that to happen. So we actually have to reverse what the bees did by mixing in water. So when you take honey and water and then add yeast to ferment that sugar, that would be a traditional mead. And that could be dry, semi-sweet, or sweet. Really depends on your recipe and your production method. But we can also just use fruit juice and honey together. And that is also, well, yes, we're adding some sugar from the fruit that we choose, and there's different recipes or ratios that we stick to for our aims or whatever the product is calling for. But that's another way to reverse that process, to get the honey into, and the sugars from that honey, into a solution where we're going to be able to start a fermentation. People figured that out a long time ago, most likely by accident, by filling, honey and water into an animal skin or a pot or a basket or whatever they had. And people thought that fermentation was magic and that bees got their honey from heaven. So while fermentation and yeast cells weren't really understood until the 1800s when Louis Pasteur did his research, people knew that there was something magic going on, because there was always going to be this resident yeast culture sitting around in those vessels that were creating alcohol. And so people all around the world were making mead. And just like when you're cooking at home, if you've got a spice rack, you're going to do your kind of basic thing, and then sometimes you might reach out and branch out and start making some really interesting flavors. So people would use any fruit, herb, or spice, just like we do today, to make these different alcoholic products. So at Superstition, we believe in and honor the traditions that came before us, and we often have references to have some homage to the people that were creating mead and celebrating it, but we also don't want to miss out on any opportunities to use modern mead making production techniques. So we have collaborated with many of the very best people in the craft brewing industry, and we share techniques back and forth. So whether it's the pumps we're using or the hop back that we're using to fill with vanilla beans and infuse our products with this beautiful flavor, there's all these different techniques we use. There's different preparations of fruits, herbs, and spices that we'll utilize. Sometimes we'll toast coconut to get a different flavor than just raw coconut. So there's so many different potential production techniques we can use, so many different flavors that we can get from all of these different types of fruits, herbs, spices. But one thing that we've always done at Superstition is use Arizona honey. And Arizona honey is really special to us. Primarily we're going to use wildflower and mesquite honey, but occasionally we can get cool one-off honey varietals like ironwood honey or white burr sage or cotton or different citrus honeys. So when that happens, we'll try and really focus on talking about the honey varietal and showcasing it in a traditional mead. But what we're going to pull a nail on here is Framboesa Atondo. And so, using just kind of the same process as what we did before, we're going to get this guy right in the right spot. All right, that should do it. And this guy actually needs to be vented. There we go. So this mead is similar to the last, but it's darker from that caramelized beet sugar that went in here. So we're looking for a color that would be, again, that kind of garnet ruby red, but with a hint of a rich crimson and a touch of brown even from that caramelized sugar. Oh, wow. Oh, that's just decadent. It's like caramel covered raspberries and a hint of alcohol, and the port's shining through. That's just beautiful.
With 10 different mushroom species packed into the most delicious gummies you've ever tried, this bottle has it all, including favorites like maitake, shiitake, lion's mane, reishi, and cordyceps. You'll experience a powerful blend of beneficial compounds that support healthy cognition and increased energy levels. These gummies are of the highest quality and efficacy, making them the perfect choice for anyone looking to perform at their best. Designed for a productive lifestyle, it's the easiest way to include all the benefits of mushrooms in your day.
Even though mead is the oldest fermented beverage, at some point in time, people developed ways to make wine and beer and developed distilling, and mead had a lot of competition. Mead was never an inexpensive product because the primary fermentable ingredient that defines the category is honey. And think about the last time you went to the grocery store. What does a bottle of honey cost? Right? So honey is the most expensive, commonly used fermentable ingredient in alcohol today. So that's been really kind of defining our biggest challenge as a meadery, as a business owner, entrepreneur, as an industry, is that we make something that no one knows about, and it's really expensive to make it and to sell it. The good news is that we've been able to transition that great challenge into one of our greatest assets, and that's that we get to define an industry. We get to define what is mead to everyone that comes into our tasting room, and everyone that comes in contact with our sales reps, everyone we meet when we're pouring at festivals all over the world. So we've done a really good job with that. It's been a lot of fun too. When it comes to mead, again, it was always expensive back in the day, and when all of these other productions of alcohol became, more popular, people figured out we can put hops in beer, it'll last longer, how to make wine better for shipping, and distilling, you get a lot of bang for your buck when you're running something through a still. So collectively, all of those pressures, they wound up making it so that mead was something that only beekeepers and really wealthy or royal people would enjoy by the time the Middle Ages were over. So when we get to the 1500s and the Renaissance, mead starts really falling out of favor in these cultures all over the world. So that was kind of how mead was always part of the lexicon and a household word for thousands of years, and then it slowly became something people were unfamiliar with. Interestingly, when you look at Poland and Ethiopia, those are two countries where mead never fell out of style. So mead is the national beverage of Ethiopia. Ironically, there's not a single commercial mead producer in the country. So if we were in Addis Ababa going bar hopping right now, they're gonna have mead, and it's probably gonna be made like in the back room by some old gal that has this cool recipe. It's probably not gonna be clear and beautiful like our mead or a white wine, but I've tried several different, they call it tej actually in Ethiopia, and they call it tej because they'll take gesho, which is also known as woody hops. It's a plant called buckthorn that grows in the desert, and it has some hop-like preservative and sort of spicy, hoppy characteristics and flavor to this product. They'll put in with the traditional mead, thereby making tej. In Poland, the meads are generally very big, bold, and sweet, occasionally barrel-aged or combined with some other fruits. And even I visited the Yucatan 2 years ago, and we were riding bikes around this ancient city of Koba, heading to this temple with our guide. And when we got there, he said, they built this temple to honor the god of honey, the honeybee god. And we're like, no kidding, we actually make mead. And I said, hey, I heard that you guys as, Mayans used to make mead. And he said, yeah, on special occasions, we still, make a batch of mead, and they'll use cacao nibs. So they're making chocolate flavored mead in Mexico, and they've been doing it presumably for thousands of years. Something else that's interesting about that is the European honeybee that also was introduced to Africa makes a lot of honey, and that animal did not exist till it was introduced in the New World. But there's a bee called a melipona bee that can only live in Central and South America and the Caribbean. It has no stinger. It's a tiny little bee. They only make 5 or 6 pounds of honey per hive a year. So melipona honey is very expensive, but that's what they were making honey out of in ancient Mexico, and still today with the Mayan cultures that are keeping some of those traditions alive. I've been to Cuba and had rum made with melipona bee honey, and in February, I'm launching a company in Brazil that one of the owners or investors in the company actually owns an apiary that makes honey for Melipona bees. So pretty soon, you're going to be able to access some international Brazilian meads made with Melipona honey, which will be really cool. Anyways, that's kind of the long story about how mead was always part of culture and how it eventually sort of fell by the wayside. Some other interesting places where mead is mentioned in history is the ancient Indian Vedas. So India, Africa, Europe, everyone was, the Mayans were enjoying mead and different flavors from mead, which is really kind of cool throughout thousands of years of history. And we're doing our part to bring it back. Our mission is to reintroduce the world's oldest fermented beverage to mankind, and that's something that everyone that works for us, no matter what their job is doing every day that they come to work. And again, it's the world, right? So we're not just in Arizona, which is our headquarters, a place we're really proud to be in, a place we're really proud to use honey and other fruits from whenever we have the chance to get those cool Arizona fruits. But we're taking what we do here in Arizona, and right now we have distribution in 24 states. And I don't even know how many countries, but we're in multiple markets in Asia and Europe. Soon we'll be distributing throughout Brazil, and it's just amazing what we've been able to do to really follow that mission and introduce so many people. Of course, the challenge is with that lack of awareness of our category and the expense that goes into making and selling our product. It takes a lot of work, and you have to hear the story and you just have to try it. So, for example, if you came into our tasting room, we've got 50 or 60 different bottles available, but our most popular product is our flight of 12. So for $24, you can try an ounce of 12 different meads or ciders that are on the flight. It changes every week, so it's always fun and fresh when you come in. And you'll get to see that mead is not one thing, right? That's really important. If I was to share just one thing with someone that has not had mead, it's don't just drink one mead and think that's what it's all like. I mean, imagine if you only had a Bud Light and you thought that's what all beer was, and you're like missing the whole world on, barrel-aged stouts and double IPAs and these crazy cool flavors that are out there. So make sure, if you have the opportunity, go somewhere that's offering, go to a meadery, look them up, see where they're at, and do a flight, try different meads, because some are gonna be just like a white wine, some may taste kind of like a beer. We have a mead we're canning in 2 days that tastes almost identical to a milkshake IPA. It's got lactose and hops and honey. It's like maybe a slightly sweet version of a milkshake IPA, which is supposed to be that way anyways. There are meaderies fermenting with wild and sour cultures, doing sour meads. There's all the different barrels that we have access to. Today, it's just amazing that we can get barrels from Portugal. We can get Sauterne barrels from France. We have mead aging in those. Brandy barrels. We've got barrels from all different bourbon producers, and we have a really unique program here at Superstition that we started, exchanging barrels with breweries. So even Draft Magazine wrote an article on beer that's aged in mead barrels, and then we'll age mead in beer barrels. And so we'll think, hey, someone gave us a vanilla stout barrel, for example. Well, what will go really good with that? And they'll do the same thing with beers. Wrenhouse and Phoenix are actually doing barrel fermentation of Pilsners in fruit mead barrels. And so you'll take this, beautiful Pilsner with no fruit in it, but there's this hint of raspberry or blueberry that's just coming out of the wood that we gave them to age that in. I think you can tell by how I'm talking about this, I'm just so motivated by the unlimited potential. There's maybe 1 or 2 laws that we wish were different, but otherwise, any legal fruit, herb, or spice we can actually put into a mead, which is a lot of fun. And then we're not allowed to use cereal grains as a winery, so legally we're a winery at the federal and state level. But when we go to do a collaboration with the brewery, they have to use cereal grains, so then we get to do this whole other world of, we can take an Imperial Stout or double IPA, use a lot of Arizona honey, which is often what we'll do when we do a collab, maybe put it in our mead barrels, and again, create something that no one in the world has ever had before, that maybe you couldn't even exactly reproduce, which makes it sort of special. So you guys have seen in this process of making mead, there's a lot of science that goes into what we do. And we're looking at the pH and the gravities and the temperatures and all of these different factors that go into having a happy, healthy fermentation, creating the best product we can. Well, then there's the artistic side. And that's what the barrel program here really represents. The different qualities that we're gonna get from the different woods, the different barrels, the different way that they were all treated, really put in flavor to what we're doing that is sort of magical in the way that we don't know exactly when this is going to be ready to drink. And it's going to be different tomorrow, just a little, than it is today. And it'll definitely be different in 6 months than it is today. And until we had this facility, we couldn't dedicate years to barrel aging. And you think about everything that goes into this, and that 2 years after this went into a barrel, which will be, by the time someone's drinking this, 2.5 years probably from the day we made it. Later this year, someone's going to be drinking this and thinking, this is one of the best meads I've ever had. 12 years ago, a friend of mine came and visited us for Christmas, and he brought 3 bottles of homebrew beer. And it was so good. And I was always the kind of person that I would go to Four Peaks, you know, when I lived down in the valley, to go get a beer, and I liked craft beer. I would rather have a Newcastle than a Coors Light, right? But it was never part of my life. I wasn't a beer geek at the time, but I quickly became one when I started homebrewing. So I used to work for the Phoenix Fire Department and retired with 20 years in the job recently. But 12 years ago, I was still doing the fire thing and going to grad school and kind of wondering, hey, is there something else I could do for a side gig like a lot of firemen have? And I just kept talking about that homebrew beer that my buddy Mark had brought over. And so I got home from the fire station on Father's Day, and my wife had a whole homebrew kit, a refrigerator, shelves set up, and I didn't really know what mead was, besides that it's just the classic thing. Hey, I went to a Renaissance fair and tried it once, so stuck in my head, right? And I thought, I wonder how hard it is, because this whole beer making thing's kind of involved. I really dig it. It's a lot like cooking. But I wonder what it's like to make mead, and then cider, and then wine. And so I just got hooked. And I went to a homebrew store before my first beer was done fermenting. And I said, hey, I want to make a Belgian Chimay clone and a mead. And so I got my beer recipe. And then the guy said, here's what you need to make mead. Now go buy some honey at Costco. Well, it turns out that, at least at the time, the Costco I went to was selling Arizona honey. And that's now where we buy all of our honey from. So that was really kind of neat, just connecting the dots and learning things. Well, my first meads tasted better than my first beers. And I started using maple syrup and vanilla beans and Spanish saffron and all of these different fruit juices and stuff right from the beginning, because I always thought, hey, if I'm going to go through all this trouble to make a beer or mead at home, I want it to be different than what I can just go buy in the store. I was just following this path of creativity and coming up with new things all the time at home, and I just fell in love with the whole process. And anyone that's a home brewer dreams about having a brewery one day. So that's really what I was thinking about doing. And so I got online and started to think, hey, where can I learn how to do this? And so I wound up taking the second class that the Siebel Institute ever put on how to start a brewery. So UC Davis and the Siebel Institute, Siebel's in Chicago, are pretty much the 2 best places in the country to learn how to become a professional brewer. And I didn't have time, it wasn't in the cards to go through that multi-month international process to learn how to brew with a new family and a career anyways. But they had this 3-day class on how to start a brewery. And it sounds ridiculous to say, but I felt like I got an MBA in 3 days, because the people that taught this class that was so well run, they had just written a business plan, they had just gotten funding, they had just started a business, a brewery, and everyone that they brought in to teach you was very successful at what they did. And when you go to start a business, you know, all your friends and family will say, you know, 90% of small businesses fail and all of that. And well, now looking back, I'm like, well, no kidding. It takes a lot to pull this off. But I had some great inspiration right from the beginning. Got home, wrote a business plan, but it had 2 tracks. So I could have went down the brewing track, could have went down the mead track, because everything I learned was really parallel to how do you have an alcohol business in general. And so at the time, my wife and I, again, had started as family. We're living in the valley, and we thought, hey, where should we do this business if we're going to do it? And we traveled all around, even out of state, thinking, hey, maybe that could be a thing. But we've always kept coming back to Prescott. We love this town. We love the weather, all of the things you can do outside here. And there was an emerging foodie and craft beer scene getting going. And we thought, hey, this might be a really cool time to start our business in a really cool place. And within 4 weeks of moving here from the valley, we went to the closest winery, and of course I brought some homebrew mead with me, and we were enjoying that with the owners after we hung out for a while, and picked up a couple bottles of their wine. And they were really being nice, but they kind of meant it, I think, and they said, hey, you should make your mead here. Well, in my research, and from what I learned at that class, you can have a business entity called an alternating proprietorship. And that's where one separate licensed winery rents space from another. So we set up the first alternating proprietorship in Arizona. And At the time, I thought that may have been sort of an issue with getting our license because it was so new. It was a piece of cake. I just had to explain it and say, hey, look, federally, this is good to go. So when we started, we had a space with 4 barrels in it, 20 square feet. We would share bottling equipment, and I really sort of, we had an agreement that was all official, but we sort of worked off our lease payment by helping these guys make wine. So my wife and I became apprentices at a winery, and after about a year of doing that, we proved ourselves that we were trustworthy and good people to get into business with, because it's a big deal to set up this AP. And the owners of the former Juniper Wall Ranch and Vineyards decided to change their federal and state license to allow us to be the guest in the guest-host relationship of an alternating proprietorship. So as an entrepreneur, it was a very inexpensive way, very time-consuming, but very inexpensive as far as revenue, capital output goes to start a business. So what we did in 2012 was max out one credit card for about $10,000 and parlay that into where we are today. So right after we got going at Juniper Wall Ranch, the owners said, hey, we're looking to retire and sell the ranch. And we're like, oh, we just got started. So we started looking for what would be next. And that's our tasting room in downtown Prescott. So it took a while for all of that to happen. But 2 years after we started, we had about 2,500 square feet, about 400 or 500 square feet of production in this beautiful cellar space that my wife and I renovated by hand. And I thought it would take 3 to 4 years to realize the potential of that space to maximize what we could actually produce and sell there. It took 3 or 4 months. So then we applied for an SBA loan, and we were able to find this awesome piece of commercial property at the Prescott Air Park, about 15 minutes from downtown, and we designed and built this production facility from scratch. And if you walk around here on a tour, on one of the couple days a year we offer tours, you'll see that we are out of room. We have a warehouse in Phoenix. We have a warehouse in Sweden. We are sending mead all over the state, the country, and the world, but it's all made right here. And that's kind of the long answer to why I got into mead. But really it was taking advantage of the opportunities that presented themselves, looking at these different potential avenues we could go down. But mead is amazing, and I use that word on purpose because the word amazing, like how many times have you said that? But you don't know what it means. So the etymology of the term is based on this ancient wooden bowl that you would drink mead out of called a mazer. And if something is amazing, it's as good as being drunk on mead. So mead really is amazing. And it's sort of like I wanted to take this risk where everyone knows what beer is, and I think we would have been successful if we went down the brewing track, but I wanted to take the opportunity to get involved in an industry that was just really getting going at the time and be able to define something, to do something new, where there's no one saying, this is how this has to be. We get to make something new, and then we get to say, this is just how this is. And then we can have a different flavor, add some vanilla, pick a different barrel. And it's been so fun, and it's been such really this adventure in business, creating mead and being in a leadership role in the industry now through all of our hard work and effort and all of our amazing staff to be in a position to really define what something is. And I'm so psyched that we chose to get involved with mead because of that. And ironically, we have the top-rated hard cider in the world on Untapped and Reaper, the big sites that matter. And I'm so proud of the hard cider that we make. We do a traditional hard cider, but instead of competing with the amazing traditional hard ciders, when you go to like Asturias in northern Spain, for example, they're using wild yeast and bacteria in the air to do all natural fermentations on what they do. And we don't have cider apples in Arizona. And we do have some interesting wild yeast I've tried for home brewing and stuff. But I thought, let's do something different with cider. And so even though it's a bit redundant because apple is a fruit, we do fruit ciders. So our best-selling cider and best-selling product overall as a company is Blueberry Spaceship Box, which is a cider we make with apple juice and blueberry juice. It looks like purple champagne. It tastes just like how you would imagine it. You don't have to use your imagination at all. It's just big, bold flavor and so refreshing and enjoyable. And we do that with other fruits too, like cherries and apricots. So we have a lot of fun with the cider world. We've even done a hard seltzer for fun, but instead of doing inexpensive sugar. We wanted to make something that was craft. So we used clear Belgian candy sugar and fresh hops and lime and made a really fun seltzer called Discotheque Mathematics. And behind me, there are barrels with our very first wines. So we're doing Zinfandel. And again, everything that we do is kind of like this onion of layers of a story. I wanted to find some really cool grapes, and the distributor that we work with, Manuel Brothers here in Arizona, Luke Manuel, he grew up where his family, and still to this day, his dad and brother, grow grapes and sell grapes and make delicious wine with their winery. And so we sourced our Zinfandel from the Sierra Foothills AVA, and wines from these grapes have made 95-point rated wines. So we're hoping that people really like what we've done. And we've taken sort of an old world approach where our wine is very dry, very tannic, and very interesting, very oaky. So I think people will really like that when it comes out. And there are more wines to follow as well. So Mead is the most delicious beverage that you've probably never tried. It's so good because it's so complex and so interesting. So beyond all of the history and mythology and the stories that go into this storied beverage, right? It's undeniably, potentially, the most complex and interesting thing that you've ever had. Different honeys are just like different grains, different hops, different varietals of wine grapes. So when you take Arizona wildflower honey or Arizona mesquite honey or a honey that was extracted from a hive in the end of the summer that almost cooked and turned dark brown, all of those different honeys are going to wind up tasting different, not just as honey, but after you ferment them in a mead. They also will taste different depending on what other characteristics, different flavor profiles you're pairing them with based on the barrels you may choose to age them with, or the herbs, spices, or fruits that you're also going to age them on with or ferment with. There are all these different techniques that we get to use as a meadery. We get to use techniques from the wine world, from the craft brewing world, in order to create things that are truly unique and like you've never had before. And I think that because mead it's growing very fast, but it's also still a very small industry, it's very exciting. So when you go to a meadery and you try a flight and see what their different offerings are, you're gonna have an experience that you can't have anywhere else. You can't have that experience at a winery or brewery or a distillery or a restaurant. You have to go to a meadery tasting room to have this great range of flavors placed before you. And it really is amazing how different mead can be. So that's very exciting as well. So if you can try a very dry mead that's say 14, 15% ABV, served chill like a white wine. I'm thinking about Lager Mas de Oro is one of my favorite things. We use Arizona mesquite honey. We put it in a bourbon barrel. It's usually about 15%, but because it's mead, it's also, in the way we make it, I guess, for this product, really balanced. So you get a little of that bourbon on the nose, it's a little boozy, but you get the spice that comes through from choosing mesquite honey as the flavor, and when you serve it chilled, it's just refreshing like any sort of white wine. But mead can be just like champagne. So we can carbonate mead, we can tank condition, meaning re-ferment in the tank to get natural bubbles. We can bottle condition. There are all different, again, production techniques where we can take a mead and make it have bubbles. And that may taste similar to a sour beer, depending on how you make it. It may taste just like a champagne that you've had. We can make, I've actually made fruit meads where there were no grapes and told people just to see what they thought. Hey, this is a new Pinot Noir. What do you think? It happened to be like a dry blackberry mead. And they're like, oh yeah, tastes really good. So mead can taste exactly like wine, exactly like beer, or it can be its own thing completely. Now, if you think about mead, and if you did have a preconceived notion, you would probably think, well, it's sweet because it's made from honey. Well, grapes are sweet and mangoes are sweet, but if you made mango wine or wine from grapes, it's not going to be sweet at the end, depending on how you make it. So yes, it is true that a lot of meads are sweeter and sweeter than wines or beers that you drink. And one reason that most of what we do is 13 to 14% ABV and semi-sweet is that you can really taste the flavor that's in a mead when it does have some residual sweetness. And the first time I made traditional grape wine, I was eating these wine grapes as I was using a plastic pitchfork to throw them into the crusher destemmer, and I like out loud said, why do these taste so good? Like this is as good as any tropical fruit I've ever had. Good wine grapes are delicious. They're kind of small and they've got seeds, but they're amazing fruit, right? And I started thinking, why doesn't wine taste like this? And then I discovered Sauternes imports these sweeter styles of wine where you can really taste what that grape is. And I thought, one day I want to use wine grapes in my mead. So one of our most awarded and best-selling products is something we make every year called Aphrodisia. And we'll use different red grapes, often Cabernet or Syrah from California with Arizona honey, ferment that together. And you have something that winds up being kind of like a late harvest Zinfandel, for example, where there will be some residual sweetness, but all the flavor of the grapes, a little bit from the honey. We're often barrel aging those piments as well, so you're going to get a bit of oak. And we can make things that taste just like, again, a late harvest wine, but it's made from different ingredients, often in the same sort of way. So I think that the diversity that goes into the spectrum of mead making today, and what not just us, but some of our friends and great people around the world are doing with lower alcohol session meads all the way up to crazy barrel aged things, aged maybe multiple times in different bourbon barrels, it's just amazing. And the creativity and the potential to make something really unique in the mead world rivals or best anything else out there that I've ever had. So that's why I think mead is amazing, and you should try it.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoy our documentaries as much as we enjoy making them. Unfortunately, many of our videos don't earn enough YouTube revenue to afford the cost of production. But if you like our content, the best thing you can do is directly support it on Patreon. Plus, you'll get access to behind-the-scenes vlogs and commentary. If you're looking for something more in return, go to paragraphic.io where you can buy our other products and services. Alternatively, you can shop our Amazon storefront for our favorite equipment recommendations. Also, check out Boca, where you can find beneficial supplements to optimize your productivity. We especially love the lion's mane and mushroom gummies. And finally, consider signing up to Multitude, a platform built for long-form content, where you and other content creators can share and monetize new videos every week.